Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Welcome again to this segment of the Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host. Folks, well, we're almost ending the month of February and getting ready to go into the month of May. And month of February is Black History Month. As you know, we've done some things along that line, and we've done the Dr. King thing aspect of it. But now, all of a sudden, here we are today, and next month in May, is it Black History Month. I wish the election for Multnomah County Commissioner 2 that I'm running for was in February. Then I would have been right there in the history part of this piece. But since it wasn't, I thought I'd invite someone that would, that as far as I'm concerned, that tends to amplify defining something in history, as far as Black American history, that we should be aware of. We should have knowledge. And then the idea is to pick an entity that tends to typify the kinds of things that we always inspiring, and education is always key within our mindset now, to date. So I found someone that I've known for a number of years now, and it's kind of ironic how I met him. I met him in the Oregonian newspaper. But anyway, we will dispense with that, and that'll be another show. But anyway, this is Black History Month, and I'm invited Mr. ArtRobinson. Art just so happened to be running. He's running for U.S. Congress up in Southern Oregon. What district is that?
District 4.
District number 4, against a guy that a lot of times with me didn't answer his phone, DeFazio. He wouldn't answer his phone when I called him. But the bottom line is that I've known Art, and the bottom line is that anyway, he's running for that office. He's run several times. In fact, he's running now, and so he was willing to come and take some time out to come over here and participate in Voters Digest or Black History Month. Art, welcome to the
Thank you.
Appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I'll tell you what we'll do, and the areas that we're going to be talking to, in all due respect, we're going to go back to D.C. and Congress. I mean, we did some of that at one point in time, about maybe 2-3 years ago. But I think I'm still in a refresher course. I'm still learning, if you will. But Art spent some time in D.C. For other reasons, if you will, because he has homeschool. But the whole idea is that he spent some time in D.C. looking at Tuskegee Institute.
Not in D.C., but
but in that arena in Washington.
Well, I've thought about education a long time because I taught at the University of California,
yes.
And I've taught about 100,000 K through 12 kids through our educational program.
And your kids.
Yeah, but Booker T. Washington, we want to discuss today, and
sure.
George Washington Carver, the two of them. But Booker T. Washington was clearly the most outstanding educator in American history. He was born in a slave cabin in the South before the Civil War. After the war, he and his mother moved north, and both of them did manual labor to survive. Him even as a boy. But he saved his money, and when he got enough, he walked to a school in Virginia that he had heard would give an education to a black boy. And he didn't have enough money. He ran out in Richmond and worked some more in Richmond. He finally got there, and he had no one to recommend him, and there were many young people wanting in the school. But he'd helped his mother clean houses, and some lady that was working at this school came out. She says, "Do any of you kids know how to dust?" Booker T stuck up his hand, and she put him to work, and he did such a good job dusting, they let him into the school. Well, he became an incredible example in education and everything else. He built Tuskegee University. Tuskegee University was actually built physically by the students, and he taught, and he was dedicated entirely to the success of his people. He taught them that the purpose of education is to learn to be able to find the truth. And that if they would work, if they would learn and be trained their minds and do work that was useful to their fellow man, perhaps objects that people wanted to buy and so forth, that no one even notices the color of their skin. And he wrote several outstanding books about this. And Tuskegee became an incredible example. There is Booker T. Washington's books on education are not just for the black people. I use them in my writing about education generally because his statements about education are the best you can find in American history. He was revered in the South and the North after the war, and raised the money for Tuskegee. And there is, I've read a lot about education because I've been an educator all my life. There is no American who has ever written so much superb material about education as Booker T. Washington, and no one who has done single-handedly so much for education, especially the education of the black people in this country, than this man. He was later joined by the great scientist George Washington Carver at Tuskegee, and they both worked to build the program at Tuskegee. The university still continues. I wish we heard more about it, because people learn by example. The example of these two men is comparable to the example of our founding fathers, and the university they built should be an example as well. It's still operating, and I hope it's doing a good job for its students, but I wish I heard more about it and what he's done, as opposed to other people who pretend that they're interested in the welfare of the black man, but aren't. You won't find, if you read his books, you won't find, of course, that they're completely politically correct, because he accepted the situation his people were in and was determined to change it, and did a tremendous amount toward that. And he'd be pretty sad today to see the state of the public schools in our country, especially those that serve our black communities.
You said that you'd visited the campus.
We visited Tuskegee.
How long was this ago?
A couple of years ago.
A couple of years ago?
Yeah. His house still stands. The students that went to Tuskegee with him built the buildings. They made the bricks, built the buildings.
Wow.
And those buildings still stand. It's a historical landmark, but an awful lot of people don't even know about it anymore. But as I said, people learn by example, and that university and what he did, and then the two of them together did there, is probably the finest example of education in our country's history. And it was done by two black men who wanted their people to
so you're saying it's an ongoing campus right now?
Tuskegee University is still there,
right.
and deserves our support. I don't know much about modern university. I've been there, visited the buildings and so forth, but I don't, of course, I'm sure it's a fine place, but I don't know that.
But the historical aspect
historical aspect is incredible.
Okay, good.
And especially we're going to discuss later the situation in the schools in the United States today, and especially in view of the great difficulties in our schools, especially in the schools that serve our black people. We need to be paying a special attention to the men that made an effort to change all of that after the Civil War.
I might remind some of the viewing audience that whenever you hear about the Red Tails, and they've done movies about these guys, Tuskegee Airmen, everything. Again, they came from, and Benjamin O. Davis was probably one of the first officer, and he made general, the lieutenant general, his dad, and then the son also basically reached those same heights, if you will, in the service, and it sort of expanded throughout the military across the board. It had a great impact.
Discipline. Discipline is important in education too.
Very much so. And
when thinking about Booker T. Washington, I remember lectures he gave on discipline. He got all the students at the university there together, and he spoke to them once a week, some evening, and most of his lectures involved discipline one way or another. He was an uncompromising teacher, and he told them about the world just as it is, and just as what they needed to do to succeed in it. Not in some idealistic way, but in a practical way.
What was the main thrust of the university?
I think that, well, he taught, of course they taught the ordinary things, made sure that people had mathematics skills, reading skills, and normal skills, but there was also a strong vocational component.
Vocational.
Because, remember, after the Civil War, everybody was involved in vocations. Very few people had the luxury of not working with their hands for a living.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a lot of vocational aspects, but in all schools there were vocational aspects because that's what almost all Americans were going into, some kind of vocational labor.
Any
at
idea?
That time.
Any idea about some of the subject matters as far as those vocational?
Well, they were
cement masons and things like that.
I'm hesitant to characterize it with one, but they were training people to be blacksmiths, restaurant owners.
Okay.
He was especially interested in the trades that blacks were already in, because those they could expand and maintain their superiority in. But I think general agriculture, of course, was very important. The students at Tuskegee grew all their own food and were taught modern agriculture. And of course, after George Washington Carver was there, they had the greatest agricultural scientists in the country at the school too. So agriculture was a big thing because that was the main industry in the United States.
I was liking those kinds of things because too often it seems as though in our present day situation, people don't realize the history that blacks contributed to the whole issue of the labor force.
Yeah, well, yes, examples are incredible. The founding fathers, people like Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, just what they did by example has been a tremendous benefit to the American people. And that that the two men we're discussing at Tuskegee are not really used in that way is a great loss, because they serve as an example to everyone. As I said, I write a lot about education because I'm an educator, and I quote Booker T. Washington all the time, not because he was black, but because he was right.
You made several quotes to me. Okay, can you maybe share some of those?
Well, the main one was about the truth. I just told you that, and the one about doing something useful, and not only did that mean they wouldn't notice the color of your skin, but if you do something useful and produce something, you're productive, and make something your fellow man needs, or provide a service that your fellow man needs, then he will buy it from you. And of course, this is also an advocacy of the free market. And in the United States today, we have a very our constitutional liberties have been eroded. Our free market is in trouble. And but the things he said about education in those days assumed a free market, because the free market in the United States had not been attacked. So basically, he told these people how to succeed socially, personally, religiously, and politically in a free market. And of course, it was an entirely Christian enterprise because Americans were mostly Christian at that time. And you see the legacy of what was done in the South. You still see in the black people of the South, especially in their Christian religion.
You know, there's been many books, if you will, on the whole issue of inventions and things of that nature. A lot of folks don't realize that, but that was very plentiful during that particular time. And they tend not to spend that much time.
But Booker T. Washington was an educational innovator, but we don't know. He wasn't a physical inventor of things like Thomas Edison. George Washington Carver was an agricultural inventor, and so you can see that as soon as he could, he got him to come to the school. And the two of them ran the school together.
Well, look, why don't we delve in education? Because education is kind of key right now. It's big, it's huge, especially here in the Portland metropolitan area especially in District Number 2, which I'm going to be very interested in, and I'll be very upfront with you about Portland Public Schools. So at the end of the day, hopefully you can kind of relate that kind of situation. But I want to spend a little time about DC schools.
Yes,
that's where the leadership is.
I write about that and talk about it because the Washington D.C. schools are the only schools that are the province of the U.S. Congress. People running for Congress make all kinds of statements, many of which don't have any, Congress has no control over. But the D.C. schools, D.C. is under the Constitution run by the Congress.
Okay.
And so there are 50,000 students in the D.C. schools, K through 12. 67% of them are black. And a large percentage of the rest are Hispanic, but 67% black. The schools are extremely well funded. The Congress appropriates the equivalent of about $400,000 per 30 student classroom per year. Per year. And as you can immediately see, 2/3 of that money doesn't go to the classroom because it sure doesn't pay a teacher in a room. It goes to the state administration, the unions, the people who have grown up to feed on these schools. But besides that, even if, and it is wrong that 2/3 of the money doesn't go to the educators, doesn't go to the classroom, but even if it doesn't, if they could build a system that was good for the students, we could excuse the waste. But most of the students who graduate from high school in GC are functionally illiterate. They can't even read. It's the worst educational situation in our country. And it makes me especially irritated because here we have these congressmen parading about Washington with their big salaries and their fancy suits. Well, 35,000 black kids run about the streets of D.C. barely able to read.
Wow.
Basically cut off at the knees for life because their minds are so untrained that they will have trouble in life no matter how hard they try. This is a national atrocity. And the Congress throws money at it, but they don't break the unions. And the unions don't want it changed. So, for example, Congress becomes concerned about this, and a few years ago they wanted to improve it. So they decided to give them some more money and also asked that they put in merit pay for teachers and vouchers so that the schools would compete. Of course, the unions opposed this. My opponent, DeFazio, voted against it because he votes for the unions. And he gets his political support to stay in office from the unions. Well, now President Trump's Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, one of the first places she went to speak was the D.C. schools. And she advocates vouchers. And they hate her. The unions have attacked her viciously because she proposes competition to try to improve those schools. And throughout the country, the minority schools are not as successful as they should be, even compared. America used to have the best schools in the world. By all standards, testing of our students and so forth, there was no equal to American K through 12 schools. That was true 50 years ago when I went to those schools. Today that's not true anymore. We test really at the bottom of the developed world. And one very telling thing relative to what we're talking about today, a few years ago the Wall Street Journal carried a story about a universal test that was given to students, K through 12 students throughout the country. I think it was 8th grade, I think it was 1 grade. But in any case, they made the tests, graded it, so that the public school average would be 50 percentile. It's just the grading system. In the tests, which covered math, reading, social studies, the test results were about the same in all subjects. The white students in the public schools scored at the 58th percentile. The black and Hispanic students scored at the 25th percentile. But the test was given to homeschool students too. The homeschool students scored at the 80th percentile, all 3 races. There was no difference. The test illustrated that black, Hispanic, and white students all have about the same capabilities to excel at K through 12 education. But yet this is not true in our nation's schools. And everywhere you look, you can evaluate Portland, you can evaluate all kinds of places. One of the things you see, now there are many arguments made about this, you know, I think many of them are unprincipled, but they're made. But one thing that is very much in common is the way the money is spent. Across the country, the average expenditure on a K through 12 student is $12,000 per student 9-month year. This means that the average expenditure in a public school is $360,000 per 30 student classroom. That's for one classroom and one teacher. Now you know that the teacher's not being paid $360,000. So the teacher and the student, even throwing in PERS, you know, and the benefits of being a teacher, only about a third of the money is spent in the classroom, paying the teacher in the classroom. The other 2/3 is spent on other things. Now, I'm not degrading all the other things, but the fact is that 2/3 of the money isn't going into the classroom.
2/3.
2/3. And that's nationwide. And it's true of the Portland schools too. Portland, a few years ago, I think the number was 14,000 per student. It may be 15 now. But 15 times 30, you got $450,000 per classroom. Where's the money going? It's not going to the teacher in the classroom. And some of it goes for activities that people like it goes to the athletic program and things like this, but that doesn't cost too much. A very large part of it pays administrators, very highly paid people who do not teach. And these people make all kinds of rules that make it hard for the teachers to teach. As an example, my uncle and my mother were both public school teachers. After the war, my uncle came home from the Navy and he started teaching again in rural Iowa. He taught a full load of classes and he was given a few bucks extra to be superintendent of schools. Those Iowa farmers were not going to pay for people to sit around at desks and play that they were important. The teachers had no trouble. There isn't a lot of administration in running a classroom. So the money should go to the classroom. And I'm sure, and just throwing money, like I think of DeFazio because I run against him, but DeFazio, oh, I'm for schools. I'm for more money for the schools. The money goes to his union friends. It doesn't go to the classroom. And this is bad. I was a teacher. My main teaching experience was as a professor at UC San Diego, where I taught chemistry. But also, my children and I have a homeschool curriculum we publish, and it's been used by about 100,000 kids. And the essentials is reading, writing, arithmetic, history. All the essential things must be taught, and that money goes to the students and the teacher. It is not needed to administrate the place. So although it might be okay to have a school principal and a couple other things, when you're getting that kind of money and 2/3 of it's not going to the classroom, that's not good. There are a lot of other things that can be said about the schools. And when people consider the underperformance of black students, not just because of the students, because we already know they perform as well as everybody else when they're given an equal chance. All kinds of excuses are made, you know, their home life and so forth and so on. Well, these things all affect each other too. You see, it's not one single thing. So if people are poor and are poor, then it's a little bit different life and so forth. But so we can't just single out one thing. But one thing that's quite clear is that 2/3 of our education money isn't reaching the students, and that needs to be fixed. And I've talked to a lot of mothers because of our homeschool work, and I'll tell you, and most of the homeschool mothers, the reason homeschool do better than the public schools is partly because the parents that decide to do that, of course, are highly committed to their kids. But boy, when you're talking to a black mother on the phone, she's got fire in her eyes. Her children are going to succeed, and she's going to make sure they don't suffer what goes on in these public schools. And it's just, the public schools were wonderful. They're the heritage of the one-room schoolhouses. The public schools I had the privilege of attending were the best in the world. Those schools got me into Caltech. Caltech gave me a science education that's given me a wonderful life. There's nothing wrong with public schools. But we need good ones. And we should not be spending 2/3 of the money outside the classroom.
How much of the electorate understand that?
They don't.
Why is it
what
so
they
hard?
they understand when this guy like DeFazio stands up and says, "I want to give more money to the schools," they think he's pro-school. But they don't see his vote against changing the schools so they work, like vouchers, competition.
Right.
There needs to be competition in the system. That's one thing, but there isn't, of course. There are private schools where they cost a lot of money, and if the student got a voucher, he could choose. What Betsy DeVos has been advocating, and I think you don't advocate things just in a vacuum. You advocate them with respect to what you or where you are, not where you want to go. You can be an idealist and say, well, the country should be run this way. But if you're over here, what you need to talk about is how you can move toward that objective.
Right.
And when she sees the situation in the schools today, she advocates the vouchers. And the idea is you take that money, take that $12,000 and you give it to the student. He doesn't have it to spend. He can spend that in any school he wants and his parents can find. So they go out and find the best school for him. And the competition would mean that the public schools would improve. Those that were poor would vanish because they weren't providing a good product, and there'd probably be more private schooling because schools would grow up because of this economic potential. So in today's environment, she looks at it and she says, these schools are not performing, and they need to perform, and at least the people need a choice. The kid shouldn't be trapped because the school down the street isn't a good one. So she says, give the money to the student, let him carry it around as a voucher and spend it at the school of his choice. This sort of competition used to be in our public schools. When I was a boy, they'd even changed real estate values because people would choose real estate in the part of the city that had the best school. And if they had vouchers, they would choose to live in the place where it was easiest for their child to attend the best school. But what's better, a black student that graduates from high school in D.C. and can't read, or a black student who is given that money to spend in a school of his choice? Which one is going to come out the best?
Wow.
And which one is going to have the best life?
Wow.
And which one is going to be the best example for others to follow? It's quite clear.
What we're going to do, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to press Art to kind of give us a little more definition of vouchers and the other opportunities or options, if you will, that are available to students across the board, because that's the whole intent of this piece. Okay, I hope you're enjoying Black History Month, and we're going to go take a short break, and we'll be right back.
You are watching Oregon Voters Digest. This program can be seen again on these channels on these dates and times. Tell a friend.
will get them motivated. Okay, look like we're back. Again, I'm Bruce Prasad, your host here at Oregon Voters Digest. My guest today is Art Robinson. We're talking about Black History Month. That's what he's all about. And for those of you who missed the first half hour, I would suggest pay attention to the playback time. And you can go to YouTube. They're sitting right there, all there for you. But again, too, hopefully you've all, if you will, have enjoyed Black History Month. And that's what it is. It's just kind of to reminisce. Just reminisce on what blacks have done, and I realize some folks say, why is it so lengthy, if you will? But that's fine. You know what I mean? The fact of the matter is that that's what we're all about. We're all immigrants, and I guess we need to know a little bit about everybody for that matter. But we got a lot of things going. But anyway, Art, welcome back.
Hi.
And again, we've been talking a little bit about Booker T. Washington, and
I thought I'd tell you a story about a black educator I met.
Talk to me.
Well, I was teaching at UC San Diego. I was a young man. I finished graduate school, and they put me on the faculty, and they gave me 300 students for freshman chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
I taught that in a couple of the courses. But so I'm teaching 300 students freshman chemistry. And one night, I'm down at a hamburger joint in La Jolla and talking with some grad students, and I look up, and there's a very formidable black man, and he just walked in the door.
Mm-hmm.
And he walks over to the table and he sits down. He knows the graduate students, and he's a professor at the university, like me. UCSD was just starting out then, and they had started what they called then the third college, which was for minority students.
Mm-hmm.
He was a professor in the third college, but students from all the colleges attended classes in different ones. So he sits down, and I just shut up. This was Black Power, third world politics. This guy was really tough. And so he went on that way for a while. And then we got to talking about education. And I broke in. I said, I have 300 students in my class, and I don't pay any attention to their race, their background, nothing. They have to learn chemistry, or they're not getting out of my class. And my own concern is that they know what the things they need to know. They're all science majors that were taking that class. And this guy looks at me and he says, "You're right." He says, "Your class is tough. I know, because I'm tutoring 2 students in your class. But you're right. Our worst enemies are these white liberals that come over to the third college and teach watered-down classes to our students and make them into permanent second-class citizens."
Wow.
That's an exact quote.
Wow.
The guy knew that, and basically, I told you Booker T. Washington was tough on his students.
Mm-hmm.
They got to learn. And in his case, he was getting kids out of slavery that were going to Tuskegee, and he was tough with them. They had to learn. But here was this guy. We were political opposites practically, and he just says, our worst enemies are the guys making us feel good and making permanent second-class citizens our students. And that is happening in these minority schools today in the United States. The people running those schools are making the students feel that they're getting an education. They're not telling them the truth, because they're letting them through those schools without learning. Now, that doesn't have to happen, because we know definitively, scientifically, that there is absolutely no difference in K through 12 educational ability as a function of race. None. None. The Asians do a little better, but that's because of the ethic in Asia, which is very strongly educational. And there's some other sects that do better, but it's because of and not a lot better, but they do a little better because of the cultural aspects of their people. But we know that there is absolutely no racial difference, and yet we see this horrible racial difference across the country and in our nation's capital. One of the things I've advocated if I went to Congress, and DeFazio is tough, I'm not sure we'll ever get in, but I think that the Congress should fire everybody in those schools, then rehire the great teachers, and then go in there. I don't care how much money they spend. They should go into the D.C. schools and make them the best in the world, as an example. Firstly, those are the only schools Congress is constitutionally responsible for. And secondly, at least the schools in our nation's capital should be the best there are. If they are, that would serve as an example to the states, and educational quality would rise all over our nation. I think it is a responsibility that almost every congressman is currently not fulfilling. I think that, and that wouldn't be hard. It'd be easy to take just that small school system and turn it into the best in the world, and that should be done. The students are just as good as anybody else, and if you really did it right, you could do it. And I think you could turn that school system around in about 2 years. You could get rid of all the deadwood, put in the best teachers, pay the teachers twice as much. I don't care what you do. Raise the price of the teachers, pay the best teachers you can find, get rid of the administrators that are plugging things up, pour all the resources you need in, and in 2 years, make those DC schools the best in the world. Then they serve as an example. And examples are what are important. Today we have people, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton, you name it. The left is tearing them all down. Every one of them, you read these articles about, well, as a person, you know, he wasn't very nice, or he got into some kind of trouble. Do you know anybody that has a personal life that's perfect? We only know of one. So everybody has idiosyncrasies. Everybody stumbles in various ways in life. But what they're doing is taking the people who have accomplished great things and tearing them down and diminishing their great things by trying to find little foibles that they had which can be used against them. And this is very bad for our students too, because people learn by example. Students learn by example, adults learn by example. Whole countries learn by example. If our country would remain a constitutional republic with free enterprise, we could teach the whole world. We don't need to conquer them, they'll follow our example. And in the schools, they would follow the example. And if you could there's no question, with the budget they've got now, spent properly, the teachers would be earning twice as much. The schools would take off like a shot, and you could make half those kids' educations good enough to send them to MIT. You could do it. And it's not undoable. It can be done. It would be, you would say, well, that's not fair. They're getting something better than the others. But you build an example. And since Congress only has control over those schools, why don't they make them schools of excellence? Instead of parading around in their $170,000 salaries and big suits and letting those kids go down the drain.
But at one point in time, wasn't the USA at the top of the list?
It was. The U.S. schools.
How long was that ago?
When I attended them, I was in Houston, Texas, and when I attended those schools throughout the country, they were the best in the world. There was no comparison. Today, on average, they're at the bottom of the developed world. And
that's across the board.
That's across the board. And many things are blamed. You can't blame the money because the U.S. spends far more than any other country on its schools. I think if you had to list the things that have caused this, the biggest thing is the education unions, which have institutionalized practices in the schools that are good for the unions and not good for the students. But that's a political statement. Regardless of the reason, it's got to be fixed. And the other thing about it, I just told you could fix the DC schools in 2 years. People that talk about the schools and improving them, besides those that just want to throw some more money in, are usually have sort of gradual approaches. I'm going to fix here and fix there. They don't want to make too many waves because that's not politically good for them. But there are 50 million kids in the schools. You're going to write them off and say that, well, the next 50 million, they get a good deal? This is a situation where you should not use gradual improvement. Vouchers, merit pay for teachers, even the sort of thing I advocate in D.C. where they do anything to make those schools fabulous. Those things are fully justified because there are 50 million kids in the schools we have today. It is wrong to say, oh, I think we'll gradually improve this. I have a program that will phase in over a few years, and I have this, and gradually we can bring them back. What about the 50 million kids in there? They're going to be gone before you help them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I believe you can really represent that a crisis approach is warranted because you can't write off 50 million educations.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that I think it'd be a very good expenditure of tax money to turn the GC schools into an example that was unassailable,
Mm-hmm.
and then of course also point this out and help the states
Mm-hmm.
to build the same thing. K through 12 education is not difficult. This is reading, writing, arithmetic,
Mm-hmm.
and the use of the reading to learn history and other useful things. All the methods have been worked out a long time ago. They're applied in home schools throughout the country by non-trained people, just parents,
Mm-hmm.
and they work very well.
Mm-hmm.
But these have been gradually degraded in the schools,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not good. And discipline is essential too.
That's another, yeah.
I'm not advocating. Well, you know, I could get in as much trouble as I liked here today, but you know, boys are boys. And when I went to school, if you got a little bored in the back of the room, you popped a rubber band or threw a spit wad or passed a note, you know. And boy, if you didn't wind up in the principal's office 2 or 3 times, you weren't one of the guys. And in those chairs outside the principal's office, you were waiting for your spanking,
That's
and
right.
the guys were discussing which guy had the.
And from a PE instructor. Right. PE instructor. I remember those days.
Well, I'll tell you something that would just drive them crazy. When I went to high school, if you got in an argument with somebody at PE,
Yes.
the coach just got out boxing gloves.
Oh yeah.
The coach would get out boxing gloves and let you do it. I had
yes.
kind of a glass jaw. I was
Yes.
knocked out a couple of times. But the point is that, and I'm not advocating a particular kind of discipline, and we have a different attitude toward that today, but I have taught a few times in public schools because teachers in our area have asked me to come over and teach a class on something that they thought was interesting. And one thing that's striking is no discipline in the classroom. Kids can't learn under that condition. And without that discipline, they have to learn it at home on the side, and the best hours of the day are spent in the school. So discipline is required too, and that's what that guy Loya was telling me. He says, "Yeah, they come over here and make our students feel good and turn them out not knowing their subject."
There you is. There, there's a person there.
So and there's a lot of that in the schools too. A lot of if you feel good about it, and you had a good time. And the other thing that there's a lot of is misplaced self-esteem. You can't fool a child. You can't make him believe that he can do something when he knows he can't. Yet there's a tremendous emphasis on making him feel good regardless of whether he succeeds. It's not wise.
No,
because his whole life's at stake.
Yes.
You're
Yes.
not helping the child by teaching him a watered-down course and then patting him on the head and telling him how good he is.
Right.
Because then he goes out in the world and he's a mess.
I'll bet myself.
So we can fix it, and it should be fixed now.
Good. I'll tell you what, I've got a small clip, again, right in line with Black History Month. Had something that basically transpired during my stay in the building that I had previously on, Norma and I, and it was on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard and Shaver. And a gentleman was coming down and from the arts world, and he was looking for a building to put some art on it, and no business would allow him to put this artwork.
That's fabulous.
And you know, and these were art folks, and both of them were male and a female, and so he said, "Bruce, can you allow us to do this piece?" And I said, "Well, oh yeah, what is it?" And so he basically laid it out. I said, "Why not?" You know, he came to a black businessman on the boulevard and whatever. So we got a short clip. I'm going to play it running my mouth using. Let's play this short clip, and then we'll talk about it. Okay? All right? Is it ready? There we go. Okay, he's going to try it again. See if we can get it done. Okay? The gentleman who approached me, a guy by the name of Samsa Dean. Samsa Dean. Okay, got 1 minute. Okay, get ready to do it now. They're gonna try to put it on there. Okay. Okay. Looks like he's getting ready to put it on. You guys gonna be able to put it on? Okay. I guess we're ready for it. We're not ready for it. You're not gonna be able to do it. Don't have to do it. 1 minute. 1 minute. Okay, you got about 1 minute. But I think we're still going to be able to see that shot and whatever. But it was a very interesting piece. My point is, he came to me and he said that the Arts Commission for the City of Portland would allow him to do this mural piece. And she said, "Well, gee whiz, if you're gonna give me that permission, boom, this looks great. You know, you're a black businessman, etc." He told me, he said, "Well, look, tell you what you'll do." He said, "Well, gee, let me run down." I said, "No, why don't you walk?" This particular building, okay, here I own, is on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard in Shaver. I was doing construction consulting and the like, and an artist came by one day and wanted to see whether or not he might be able to use the building and put murals on it. And to my surprise, he said he was not able to get a business on the avenue to allow him to put these murals on. Felt they were just too black or whatever, and it was historical and the like. And so I said, "Well, hey, why won't you do mine?" And so he said, "Fine." And so the city of Portland owns these murals. The city of Portland owns these murals. But we got together, he got together kids from the neighborhood. He got artists from the neighborhood. And these were a diverse group of folks that did this piece. His name is Samsa Dean. Samsa Dean. In fact, I think he's still a teacher at Portland State University. But Samsa Dean did this piece. On the north side of the building, I had issues on African Americans, like Dr. King, if you notice in the center of the photo up there, and his wife, and their various names, Vouchers. And over here, I had a march. He put a little march piece up there, and the whole idea was that there's Dr. King there in the middle, and the figure right next to him with a Greek hat and a mustache is me. That's me. And then the idea was to have blank faces. And then every year I was going to put a leader. We was going to have a little contest and put a leader and paint that leader in that march. But that's me right next to Dr. King. And that was the whole idea of this deal. It was good. Now on the northern side of the building, I'll show you. Let's go on the other side of the deal. I'll show you that one. Okay.
Think about something. I wanted to.
Go on.
I'm watching this. Why are you talking about Martin Luther King? You're talking about him because he sets an example.
Mm-hmm.
His work is done.
Yeah.
His life is over. But he serves as an example to motivate people to follow his example. He wasn't perfect either, you know. People on the right will come out and say, "Well, Martin Luther King had these idiosyncrasies." I don't care. He's remembered for what he accomplished, for the big thing he accomplished. He's an example. That's what our students need. They need those examples. On both sides of the political aisle now, you see people trying to tear down the great Americans by finding out little quirks that they had. And that damages our students too, because they need these examples. It doesn't matter what race they are, they accomplish great things. And that's why in Black History Month is so important, especially because it should bring forth people like Martin Luther King, Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, and and the great examples of great Americans, because it serves a very important purpose,
very important,
especially for the youth,
and especially now during this
particular
time. And in this particular mural, he made it it was a commitment that it was a diverse group of kids, a diverse group of kids that did this. There was more to this than just you know what I'm saying, just in i.e. just blacks doing something. It was a simulation aspect of it, and they did this piece. But the other unique thing about this piece is that when we first put it on the wall, there was a kid in the back. Basically, they were reciting in the back, and he threw some paint on it. A little white kid. He didn't know. Just a little white kid. He threw it on the deal. But anyway, as time went on, in fact, it's not on there right now, but that paint is still on there. I couldn't get the City Arts Committee folks to give Samsa Dean some money, if you will, and giving them just so much money. Once they found out it was me, they said, well, we don't want to deal with this piece. But they couldn't give us any money so he could clean that mural up and put a kind of a plastic coating on it so that they could just wipe the thing off aspect of it. And on the other side, on the other mural, which was very progressive, it had computers and had kids, and running and participating in sporting events and this, that, and the other. They all of a sudden one day someone came by and said, we didn't like it. We just didn't like it. And so as a result of that, the present owner and the city gave them the opportunity to take it off the wall. They just took it off, just completely took it off. And then you ask yourself the question, well, why? You know what I mean? But it still is. It's the city's murals. They should be taking care of it. It's the Arts Commission's responsibility. I've approached the Arts Commission on a number of occasions, but unfortunately, their position is that, well, Bruce, we have blacks that are sitting on our board, and they've agreed that the murals are too black.
In the news,
I mean, it's just crazy.
In the news today, next week, Billy Graham will be lying in state in our U.S. Capitol.
Yeah.
The last person, other than a politician, to lie in state was Rosa Parks. And I've sung in these 5,000 person choirs at Billy Graham Crusades. And I tell you, they're made up of the choirs from all the local churches, all races, and that was Billy Graham's ministry was entirely race-free. So you see, the last person that I mentioned, the last person to lie in state before Billy Graham was in 2005, a long time ago, was Rosa Parks. Another example. In education, quality, toughness, discipline, and the example of people who have accomplished things is very, very important.
Do you think now that, and I want to maybe talk about this subject at some point in time, but now this phrase is coming up now out of our present day environment in relation to race, institutional racism. Have you ever heard of that before?
Well, I've heard the term.
But now it's shown itself here within the county that I'm running.
I think we could. I would say that what I've described in D.C. could be called institutional racism. Certainly racism, because I see what's being happened to those people. They're not doing it because of race. Most of the administrators in the D.C. schools are probably black. I mean, doesn't mean they're doing the right thing. This isn't a bunch of schools that are run entirely by white people and they're there to suppress blacks. I don't think the problem in the D.C. schools is caused by racism, but that's the result. The result is...
But here, it's different. I mean, I'm in the Portland metropolitan area. I'm just saying.
I don't know much about the Portland schools, except they have the same economics.
We've had a major incident here locally.
I
mean, it's still on the table right now. It just so happened the chair of the county called this African American woman, back Commissioner Smith, a bitch. Put it that way. It was really sad. But anyway, it's being discussed. But the whole idea is that someone said, why don't we get back into institutional racism and maybe get this thing back together? And we're working on the system.
It's kind of dangerous. You could say anything you want. Use any kind of profanity against the President of the United States right now. They applaud.
Yes, I know. But I'm just saying that whole aspect of it. We have this such a divide. In fact, even when I think about the shooting aspect of it, I say it's not the gun, but the bottom line. What gave them the motivation, if you will, the enthusiasm to pick up that weapon and shoot someone? Again, here we go again.
Well,
okay. You see what I'm saying?
There are several things to say about that, and I don't think we have time.
We don't have time right now.
And if we've talked about we've talked about education, and that probably has spent all of the political capital.
Exactly. Well, Art, you did a marvelous job. We wish you all the luck in the world for that seat that you're running, District number 4, right?
District 4. It's
DeFazio.
Sort of a
remember that name, ArtRobinson. I mean, he's quite a guest, and he's got more. So, by the way, we haven't even gotten into his work and what he does. In fact, that's another very interesting subject matter we like to discuss. Okay,
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Okay, good. Well, thank you very much, Art, for being. And so, like I said, with the ending of February, and now we're getting ready to get into the elections, folks. And all I would suggest to you, get out there and vote. Go and register to vote. Register to vote. Very, very important. And make sure you read your voters' pamphlets. Make sure you watch that material that's just coming in and flooding, if you will, your mindset in terms of all these beautiful pictures and monies and whatever. Make sure you check that out. Make sure you talk to the candidate if you can. It's very, very important. So get out and vote. Again, it's been a pleasure. You take care. I'll see you next week. And I'm sure we'll have a very interesting show again with you. Have a good one. Take care. Hey folks, I'm Bruce Prasad, and as you might know, I'm running to be your next county commissioner. But I will continue to host our Oregon Voters Digest, and will likely share my views on important issues here. And since this is going to be a very important election year for everyone, I'm opening this platform for other political candidates to share their views too. So, if whether you're also running for Multnomah County Commissioner, or if you are going to be on the ballot in any other position in our viewing area, you are welcome to come on this show and tell us what you are all about. This is an open invitation to anyone running for any office in the Portland area. We broadcast our show live every Sunday afternoon here in Northeast Portland and would love to share the stage with you. If you're interested, send us an email at ovdguests@gmail.com. The email should be displayed on your screen now. So, come on down, write me an email, and tell me who you are, what position you're running for, and maybe a little about yourself. Again, our email is ovdguests@gmail.com. Even if you're not running for office, be sure to stay tuned over the next several months. You're going to want to know how your candidates stand on the issues and how they plan to represent you. Have a great week, folks. Everybody, I love you. Take care.